Today we'll be continuing with our critiques, I guess, of Paul Krugman. This time we are actually going back in time a little bit. I thought this was interesting, mainly because there's some pretty good evidence he was just wrong. We're going to do some critiquing of past Paul Krugman. This is right after the tax cuts were passed. So, A, this is very early on after the tax cut, and B, this is when it was kind of a lot more talked about. But we'll watch it. I'll stop it a couple times. Let's just get going.
The big hit with investors, of course, it would be the stock rocketed to the top of the Dow 30 Wednesday. The Trump tax cuts helped to pay for the $100 billion buyback. Some critics say that money should be going towards jobs or investment rather than corporate shareholders. Professor Krugman, what do you think? I mean, this is a massive buyback. Again, investors obviously like it. And yet, to give Apple some credit here, they are bringing the money back, and some of it will go into investing in American jobs.
Actually, it's not clear that any of it will go into investing in American jobs. I I don't blame Apple. Apple is doing, they're maximizing profits. They're maximizing their goals. What Apple is saying is, yeah, we got a big tax cut bonanza. That doesn't really give us any particular reason to invest more, which is what's happening across the board. The whole theory, the theory of the case behind this tax cut was that it was going to lead to a huge surge of corporate investment, real investment, actually, plant and equipment, that was going to eventually push up wages and share that.
And it still could.
It still could, but
So Apple, like every company, has a marginal propensity to invest. And what that means is for every new dollar that Apple makes, some amount of that will be reinvested. Any company that doesn't have this is not going to do very well. When you're making more money and you simply consume or pay out all of the new money that you get, your business is not going to grow. Apple, like any other company, wants to grow, so they will have, without a doubt, a marginal propensity to invest. I don't know what it is for Apple. I don't really know what it is for any company, but to say that they're just not going to use any of this money to invest is very silly. It speaks to Paul Krugman's worldview in that, in his mind, once a company is rich, they will simply take all of the money that they gain and shovel it off to their investors, and will not do anything to improve the standards of the job quality for their employees. They won't hire anymore. They won't bother to invest in any more machines because they're already rich. Now, part of what Apple is going to do with this money is pay off government employees because, as we know for sure for Apple, they definitely have plenty of barriers to entry that they've set up. Part of this is their what do you call it? Their patent on rounded cornered rectangles. These kinds of things are kind of silly. And eventually, so that's where part of it's going to go. But also some of it is going to go into building new machinery and hiring new employees. Even if that's just sales employees, it's still new employees. And especially considering there's a tax cut, there's more money to be made in general. So now for every new dollar that they actually bring in, they get to keep, I think it's, 20% more of it? So obviously they're going to try to increase the amount of products that they're selling. They're able to lower prices because they get more of the money from each sale into their own pockets, which means that they don't have to charge as much to the consumer. So all these things point towards Apple creating more products and more jobs and having a higher level of investment. Of course, Paul Krugman ignores this.
We should be seeing not the big rise in wages. That was always supposed to be the long run, however long that's supposed to be. But we should be seeing an investment boom, or at least some indications of a planned increased investment right now, and we're just not seeing that. So there's enough data already under the bridge for us to say that this is not playing out according to the story. This doesn't look.
So, quickly here, this is less than a year after the new tax plan was released. I guess we haven't even had a year of it yet. They happened this year, so we haven't even had a year. It does not just instantly happen. I mean, a lot of companies did come out right away and say that they were going to increase investment and hire, and they did give bonuses to their employees, as we'll look at in a bit. But these things take time to plan. I mean, even if they started planning as soon as Trump said there was going to be a tax cut, they still wouldn't know how much of a tax cut there's going to be, and eventually they did find out, but it's not like you can just instantly have a huge plan of investment that's just ready to go. You need time to plan these things out. So to say that, oh man, we've got enough evidence already to know for sure, that is bullshit. That is absolute bullshit. In 5 years, we'll have enough evidence to know. Probably less than that. Let's say 2 years. We'll have enough evidence to know if there's going to be a real increase in investment. But yeah, there's no way we could know definitively yet that there isn't going to be one. We can see, and we have seen a bit of an increase, and we'll look at that in a bit, but to say that he's sure already is ridiculous.
Look at all like the story. This looks like the tax cut is a nothing burger as far as business investment is concerned.
Such a stupid
you
word.
You wrote a column recently about this.
What does that mean?
How's that tax cut working out for you? And the point that you make is that it's not really top of mind for Canadian American workers. You're not
That's an
seeing
odd
them
slip.
talk about the increase in their paychecks and jumping for joy, or it really affecting their spending. Having said that, why do you think it has and had such political promise?
Oh, I don't think it ever did have a lot of political promise. I mean, there were a couple of Republican Congress people who actually said, my donors are telling me pass this tax cut or you won't get any money from me. So, obviously the corporate interests that got a big tax cut liked it. But there was never any strong popular demand. I mean, polling always shows that the public really doesn't want tax cuts, certainly doesn't want tax cuts for corporations. And the belief that this was going to lead to a big increase in wages was a belief held in the teeth of most independent analysis, most historical evidence. You just couldn't, what's happening now is pretty much exactly what you could have predicted was going to happen, except I have to admit, even I'm surprised at how little effect we're seeing on corporate spending.
You mean you actually thought there would...
So the idea that the people in general don't like having lower taxes is also quite silly. Paul Krugman doesn't care. He says, oh, well, the richer people are getting more of a tax cut. Well, yeah, they paid more taxes. But here's the thing. A low-income family that gets an extra $1,000 back at the end of the year, that's a big deal for them. That's enough for new hockey equipment for their kids. That's enough for a new trip that they can go on now. Or maybe they're just going to help pay rent or pay off some debt with that. That's real money. But, of course, Paul Krugman, who makes far more than this in a day, doesn't give a fuck about $1,000. Why would he? It's an inconsequential amount of money for him. So as far as he's concerned, these poor families that are getting this money back, they don't care? I don't get that. Like, yeah, other people are getting more back, but that doesn't mean that you're not getting something back. Again, the lowest income people are probably the ones, or some of the ones, who are going to be the happiest about this because they're actually getting something that they're not losing something they already had, I suppose. They're losing less of what they made. So, I think this just speaks to his elitism in some way. Maybe not. Again, it's true that the richest people in the economy are going to get more back from this, but so what? Everyone's getting something back. There isn't a tax bracket that didn't have lower taxes, except for people who don't pay taxes, I suppose. They probably didn't get any tax cut there. But then again, how do you cut someone's taxes if they don't pay any?
Would be some type of a bump.
I thought there'd be some bump. I thought it would be a small bump, but I thought there'd be something, and you really can't see it at all.
And having said that, there is still time. And I have to put to you, I mean, what do we want here? Do we want Europe? They had struggling with tepid growth for years now. Some people would say a low-tax regime is the way to go. It will, in the long run, stimulate growth.
Actually, Europe, one of the arguments for this tax cut was that our corporate tax rate, the headline tax rate, was higher than Europe's. So this was, Europe has gotten where it is, first of all, with relatively low corporate tax rates. And then
Europe has gotten to where it is with some low tax rates, like in the Nordic states. That's true. The Nordic model has low corporate tax rates and very high personal income tax rates. These do allow for more freedom in the economy, but there's still less of an incentive for an individual to go out and take a risk when the payoff is going to be less to them. There was a time where they had low personal income tax rates as well. They were growing even faster. Denmark was, I think it was just the richest country in the world for a good little while, and while they were the richest country in the world, they'd just been in a period of low personal and corporate tax rates. Now, when they started increasing personal tax rates, their economy started slowing down. Shocker. and now they are no longer the richest country in the world. I think it might be another Nordic state, or I can't remember what it's. I don't know. I'm sorry. I did know this at one point. Or the highest per capita income, which more or less is the richest country in the world as far as the citizens are concerned. And so they have the highest income. So, yeah, I mean, you can point to that. The other thing here is Europe has seen very stale growth rates, and that's largely because of the EU. It's not really very helpful for individual countries when everyone is playing by France's rules, or Germany's for that matter. They have so many regulations and so many bureaucrats who are soaking up their resources that their economy has slowed down a lot. They might have the single market in Europe, but it doesn't really do anything if there's so many regulations on everything that you can't grow. This is one of the reasons that Britain is pulling out, and rightfully so as far as I'm concerned. They now can trade with the rest of the world, and even if Europe cuts them off, well, shit happens. I'd rather trade with the States. I'd rather trade with Asia and the United States and Canada than I would Europe. That's one's not close for me, especially when you are bogged down by all these regulations. So, just to say, well, Europe doesn't have that high of corporate tax rates, so this doesn't mean anything. Well, you need to look at Europe as a whole and understand there are other reasons as to why there's such stale growth in Europe. And yeah, it's not even every country. I mean, some of them still do have a relatively high tax rate in the 30s, which is not really what you want.
Actually,
but that doesn't bear out, as you know, from the way they actually companies have to end up doing their books at the end of the day.
Well, yeah.
There's a massive tax regime attached.
The whole shifting, the leprechaun economics, where all the profits somehow pop up in Ireland. But the
Did you know that Ireland is actually one of the places that has done a lot to lower their taxes? And now he's making a joke of how there's money in Ireland. That is funny. Quick history lesson there. They had very high taxes before the 80s. They have lessened their taxes quite a bit, and Ireland has become much richer. Again, I mean, they're still part. I think they're still part of the EU, so they're still being held back by that. But it's been a pretty big change. If you look at pre-80s Ireland to post-80s Ireland, you see the difference in investment and growth. It's pretty clear, and it is not too hard to figure out why.
No, but the European story, first of all, European performance, once you adjust for demography, is not actually that bad. I mean, they've actually done a whole lot better when you bear in mind that they have much lower fertility rates and so on. GDP per working age person hasn't done that badly compared with the U.S. But in any case, that's a hell of a broad argument to make, right? The question is, was there ever any good reason to think we were going to get big economic benefits from what is now looking like a $2 trillion tax cut, mostly aimed at corporations? And the answer is there was never any good reason, and initial evidence is even worse than the pessimists expected.
And which brings us to the hangover of those tax cuts. So if we start talking about very large deficits, obviously the ballooning debt as well, and talk about, are the Fed's hands going to be tied going forward, especially as some people predict we'll be headed into the low end of this business cycle by 2019, 2020?
Well, I have to say that I'm not. It's not a good thing. I mean, this is $2 trillion that will weigh on people's minds, will weigh on legislative initiatives. This is $2 trillion that could have been spent a lot better in other ways. I don't see it.
Paul Krugman believes that the government will spend money more efficiently than corporations. This is stupid. The government has no private or personal incentive to spend money efficiently. Talked about this before, but if you can just take, well, actually I don't know if I have, but if you can just take money from people and not have to really worry too much about it, when you can just increase taxes whenever you need to pay off debt, there's not as much of an incentive to keep your costs down. You see this in the Canadian healthcare system. The money spent on the bureaucracy that runs it has tripled since it became more socialized. So the fact that, I should say, the proportion of money spent on it has tripled. It's gone from about 20 to 60. So the fact that the fact that the government is losing this money and is not going to be able to spend it itself is fine. I mean, think of it from a corporation's point of view. if you fail as a corporation, I guess corporations are a bad example since they are, in a way that states have figured out to allow rich people to avoid consequences. But if we were to think of a system without corporations, where the people who were spending money, it had to be their money, and they were directly responsible for it. And if they failed in their business ventures, it would come back on them. Right now, with a corporation, you have what's called limited liability. So you don't really have to pay a bunch of this money if your business fails. You can just kind of shrug it off and say, well, it was incorporated, so whatever. This is something that I am definitely against. I think people should have to suffer the consequences of their decisions economically. But so let's think of a situation where there were no corporations, and instead a business tax instead was what we had. Which, to be fair, I wouldn't really want this either, but the tax on business at all is what I'm saying. But let's think of a situation without incorporation and with no limited liability. If a person is going to make an investment, there's always going to be a risk associated with that investment. If the venture fails, they lose money. Do you think that they will be more keen to make sure that money is spent correctly if they are responsible for that business than the government is when they're not really all that responsible for the money? They just tax or go further into debt to pay it off. Who is more likely to spend that money wisely? Who's more likely to make sure that their money is not being wasted? Well, it's the person who is personally responsible. When a bureaucrat decides to spend money, they are not personally responsible in any way. They spend the money, or first they have to convince someone to give them the money, which again isn't going to be as difficult because it's a bureaucrat convincing other bureaucrats for money. And if it fails, well, darn, the government just has to absorb it, and the individual who took the risk has no cost. Is that going to help, or is that going to mean that the money's going to be spent better when the government is deciding where it goes as opposed to a private individual who bears the consequences? Well, no. Again, if you have no personal incentive to make sure that money is spent well, and you can just tax more if you fail, who cares? It's like the CBC. The CBC is constantly taxpayer funded because it is always losing money. It is a gigantic sinkhole of taxpayer dollars, and it produces some shit-tacular content. If the CBC were forced to compete with other radio, TV stations, they would have to do a better job, or they would go to business, because, again, they're constantly losing money. This is very common among government institutions that are kind of competing. They are the same with Air Canada, constantly losing money, constantly paid for by taxpayer dollars. So it just doesn't make sense to me that Paul Krugman wants the government to spend this money when they have a track record of spending money very poorly, as opposed to corporations, which at least have some amount of personal interest in doing well. If your corporation fails, well, you stop getting the money from that. Your investment kind of disappears, but in the overall, it's not like you're going to go insanely into debt if this happens. But at least there's still some incentive there. You want to keep making the money from the business doing well, so you have an incentive to keep doing it. But the government doesn't care because they'll just take the public taxpayer money.
Debt crisis for the United States. The country is political. I think we're a politically stable country, though God knows we're getting where.
But now you're making Trump's argument for him.
No, I'm just saying that I don't see a crisis for it.
You sound far too sanguine about.
Well, yeah, I look at Japan with debt that's 200% of GDP and can still borrow at extremely low interest rates, and I say it's really hard.
Is he pointing to Japan as a good example of his policies? Jesus Christ, he just noticed it, or he just mentioned it. 200% debt to GDP. Japan's economy is complete shit. They're so far indebted, and yes, they're still lending or borrowing money, but is that a good thing? They're just going to continually borrow until no one will lend to them anymore, and then boom, their entire economy collapses because there's no more foreign money that's going to hold it up. This is a terrible example for him. In 100 years, Japan will have gone through a gigantic depression because they simply will not do the responsible thing and stop spending. They keep spending more. More. But, again, in the eyes of a Keynesian, more is fine, because I've talked about this, but they see debt as a form of income. So if you're going into debt and the value of your debt depreciates because of inflation, then well, who cares? It's like actually you're making money off the debt. It's absurd. This is not a good example. You should not be using Japan as an example of a good economy or one that we could model our own after. Jesus.
For a country like the United States to get into a debt crisis, but this was not a smart thing to do, and think of all the other things we could have done instead of giving a big tax, instead of basically paying for share buybacks by Apple.
And that is at the heart of the issue here. When you talk about other things that could be done, why do you think infrastructure wasn't done, and do you think it still can be done?
Well, to do infrastructure, I mean, it's simple. The idea is simple. Just have the federal government borrow some money. Would have been better to do it when we were more depressed, but still have the federal government borrow some money and actually build stuff and repair stuff. The trouble is, first of all, you have to be willing to accept the idea of increased government spending, even on anything, and a lot of Republicans are not. And so
they're not, because it's already so insanely overboard that, any more is pretty crazy. The long-term consequences of these policies are not ones that Paul Krugman wants to talk about, but you have to pay that money back. And if someone is lending you money, it is still good for them, even after they've, because they also know that the value of their loan is going to depreciate over time. So after considering that, they still want to lend the money to the government. Actually, now they have to buy their own bonds, but that's not really the point. These people or wherever the government gets their money from, they already know that it's going to work out this way. So why would they be lending the money to the government if they knew that they were going to be losing over the long run? Well, they wouldn't. That'd be stupid. So clearly, this is not going to go very well. And again, these investments, like an infrastructure, it's a consumption good. Infrastructure is not an investment or a capital good. You can say, the roads are going to be used for a long time. Yeah, sure. But they don't increase in value over time. This is the difference between a consumption good and a capital good. Consumption good, the value decreases over time, and a capital good, it will increase. So if you've bought a machine that makes, chairs. That's a terrible example. If you buy a saw for your shop, you're going to keep using that saw over time, and eventually it will pay for itself plus some. But if you buy a chair for your home and you sit in it, that chair doesn't actually increase in value. You get a consumption use out of it, and it's probably going to be useful for you, but it doesn't make anything itself. All it does is make your life a little better. So these roads are going to give people jobs temporarily, and building roads and whatever, sidewalks. But once those things are built, these jobs disappear unless you spend more money as the government. And again, it's a consumption good, so the value of these things will go down over time. Not only that, but you've gone into debt to do that, so you're also losing money from that. So in 3 ways, you're going to be losing money by going into debt for an infrastructure package. Good one, Paul. Real good.
Trump team tries to come up with public-private partnerships, ways to avoid actually having this stuff be on the books. And secondly, to actually do that, you have to have some competent people to decide where and how the money's spent. So does this sound like a description of the Trump team to you? I mean, if you were going to assemble a group of people...
Does it sound like a description of any group of politicians ever? No. Competent people do not go into politics. They go into other fields where they can make money the good way. The people who go into politics are the ones who want to use that centralized power to make money for themselves the easy way, and the way that's not good for the country as a whole in the long run.
Who you would not want in charge of a major infrastructure build, you couldn't do better than the people we've actually got in and around the White House.
So why do you want them to do it?
Infrastructure is an easy idea. I can easily imagine even some previous Republican administrations doing it. Eisenhower did the interstate highway system, but not these people. And so they keep on talking infrastructure, but it never actually happens.
The president has a lot of swagger these days when it does come to the economy. He feels as if it's his touchstone and he knows what he's doing there. Going forward, how do you think there will be more of an audience for the kinds of ideas you're putting forward? Because as I said, there's an anti-elitist bent right now, and as much as you don't want to accept that label, people will say Professor Krugman is an elitist, and he did not see the writing on the wall for so many years, despite the brilliant economic models put forward.
I think this is not. Look, trade is an issue where a lot of us, I think, and I've admitted this, failed to see that it was as disruptive as it turned out to be. I was never one of the rah-rah globalization rules guys, but I was too sanguine about it. And as for the rest, well, look, the things that matter a lot to people's lives, the things that the government can do, is healthcare, social safety net, retirement security. Those are things on which those are all actually democratic issues. And in terms of now, if I have to admit, I think the Democrats are going to have a hard time finding a candidate for president who's going to say, I'm going to bring back 10 million manufacturing jobs. That's because any candidate who said that would be lying. And the Democrats are probably not going to choose somebody who's going to be that bold-faced about saying things that are clearly not true. Otherwise, look, there's always going to be some people who imagine that tough talk, swagger, is going to bring, is the solution to all problems, but they aren't. And I think there's probably a lot. Well, what do I know about politics? But I suspect there's a lot of voters who in the end will actually face up to that reality.
All right. So that's out of the way. We have some evidence. So these are the companies. When was this posted? Actually, it's a good question. January 2018. No. Yes, January 2018 this was published. So very shortly after. But this is the group, or this is the list of companies that had already decided that they were going to either increase investment or increase wages. So, right. Increase in 401k contributions. A $250 million investment plan over 3 to 5 years. $1,000 bonus for 23,000 employees and $118 million incentive bonuses. $1,000 bonus to all team members. One-time $3,000 bonus on 7,900 employees. $35 million to philanthropy. $1,000 to 401k for 58,000 associates and recent retirees. Repatriate billions of overseas cash. I don't really know what that means. Oh, they're bringing money back. I see. $1,000 bonuses to 200,000 U.S. employees. Additional $1 billion investment in the U.S. in 2018. $10 million investment in employees. I mean, look at this list. I counted this. There's 37. This was in January. Okay. This is a lot. And for more evidence, we have this. A Reuters article. U.S. companies seen investing more in business this year after tax cuts. U.S. companies could plow more of the money saved from sweeping tax cuts into business investments later this year, perhaps even surpassing a jump in the first quarter capital expenditure that was the highest in almost 7 years. So basically since the beginning of Obama. About 2 years in, I guess. Higher spending on technology, equipment, and facilities could ease worries that S&P 500 companies have reached a peak in their profit growth investors are counting on to extend the 9-year bull market in equities. The increased spending on the first quarter follows significant cuts in corporate taxes approved late last year by the Republican Congress. Companies have also been returning the tax cut windfall to shareholders via share buybacks, which as far as I know is when you buy some of your shares to increase the value of others. I'm not really sure how these work. $23.5 billion repurchase from Apple, with data from 94% of S&P 500 companies. First quarter capital expenditures total $159 billion, up more than 21% from a year ago, on track to be the highest year-over-year growth since the third quarter of 2011. That's a pretty big deal. These numbers are high, and I would expect higher numbers in CAPEX this year. It takes a little bit longer for companies to plan and to execute. This is my point earlier. You got to plan. You can't just randomly decide to throw a bunch of money at something and be like, "Well, I'm just going to buy all these machines." You have to figure out what you're going to invest in before you can invest. And so here we have a chart that says, okay, well, look, this is the percent increase in investment. Again, this is the first quarter, so it's a little higher than this one back here in 2011. Well, let's see where this goes. I mean, this was a 5 quarter. Yeah, this is 5 quarters in a row. We've seen 1 quarter from this point, which was, when was this? This is in May, so this is the first quarter. It's hard to get this info. I looked for stuff that was more complete, but I couldn't really find anything. So we're just going to have to see where this goes. I mean, if it's another thing like this, and presumably it could be more long run, well, great. That seems like a lot of investment, but we don't really know yet. I think my main point here is Paul's definitely being very... what's the word? He's decided something too early. He's basically already saying that this is nothing. But again, I mean, this stuff was already done by the time he was saying this. So this is a bunch of companies in the I don't know what these are. S&P 500 is the same index. This is 37 companies in S&P index S&P 500 who'd already increased investment or straight up wages. Increased minimum wage to $11 an hour in April. So I don't know. He just basically has no leg to stand on here, as far as I can tell. And for the long-term effects, we don't really know yet. It's going to be a little while. The economy stayed pretty strong. Growth has been pretty great in the U.S. I think they were at least hit 4% GDP growth, which is the first time that's happened in a little while. And so we'll just have to see. It's definitely too early to call. Either way, to be fair, this could be very short run. I don't think it will be. I think it will be something that looks more like this, but it could be short run. I don't know. We'll just have to see. Alright, well, thanks for watching. Hope you learned something. Have a good one.